Right now in southern China, entire towns are underwater, a dam has failed, and the death toll keeps climbing. This isn't a single storm passing through. It's a compounding disaster that's been unfolding for over a week, and it's still not over. In fact, as we'll get to later, a second major typhoon has already slammed into the country's east coast, while the south is still digging out of the mud. Let's break down exactly what's happened, what's happening right now, and why officials are calling this one of the most severe flooding events the region has seen in years. It started with Tropical Storm Maysak. What began as heavy rainfall over southern Guangxi turned into a catastrophe within days. The region received cumulative rainfall between 10 and 40 centimeters in many areas, but in the hardest hit zones, rainfall totals exceeded 90 centimeters. That's over 35 inches of rain concentrated in a matter of days on ground that simply couldn't absorb it fast enough. In one particularly extreme case, a village called Bafeng in Binyang County recorded roughly 713 millimeters, nearly 28 inches, of rain in a single 24-hour window, reportedly the highest one-day total ever logged in the region. To put that in perspective, that's roughly a third of some regions' entire annual rainfall dropping in less than a week. A volume of water that overwhelms not just rivers and drainage systems, but the reservoirs built specifically to hold excess water back. The breaking point came at the Liulin Reservoir. This wasn't some minor local pond. It's the largest medium-sized reservoir in the area, holding more than 93 million cubic meters of water and serving as the primary irrigation source for tens of thousands of acres of nearby farmland. Built back in 1960, under engineering standards that reflect a completely different era of rainfall forecasting, the dam simply wasn't built to withstand what hit it this month. Under the pressure of record rainfall, two separate sections of the dam wall gave way, tearing open gaps that eventually stabilized at roughly 110 meters wide. Over 360 feet of open breach pouring water downstream. TV showed a wall of muddy water tearing through crumbled concrete, sending a torrent directly into the city of Hangzhou, under Nanning's jurisdiction. This wasn't a slow rise of floodwater. This was a sudden, violent release, and it's the single biggest reason the death toll climbed so sharply. Dam failures like this are particularly dangerous precisely because they compress what would otherwise be a gradual flood into a matter of minutes, giving downstream residents almost no time to react once the structure actually gives way. One resident later told local media that the water reached the first floor of their family's home within about an hour of the evacuation notice going out, and kept rising until the family had no choice but to retreat upstairs. Others said they never received any formal warning at all before the water arrived. As of the latest briefing from Nanning's vice mayor, the death toll stands at 39 people, a dramatic jump from an earlier count of just 6, and higher still than the figure of 17 reported only a day or two before that. 26 of those deaths are directly tied to the dam breach itself. 9 people remain missing across the broader Guangxi region, with officials cautioning that the count of dead and missing could still overlap as identification work continues. To grasp the scale of the response, roughly 130,000 people have been evacuated from the region, and Chinese state broadcaster CCTV has reported that as many as 375,000 people have been affected in total by flooding, overflowing rivers, and infrastructure damage across Guangxi. Dozens of rivers, reportedly around 40 of them, burst, teethed their banks during the peak of the storm, and nearly 13,000 acres of agricultural land were damaged in the process. Drones and an estimated 5,700 boats have been deployed in a massive search and rescue operation, with crews battling strong currents and debris just to reach people trapped in partially submerged homes. That's an enormous logistical undertaking, coordinating thousands of small boats and drone units across a flooded region, often navigating around Downe. Power lines, floating debris, and buildings that are structurally unstable after days of submersion. In one nearby village, roughly 600 residents were left safely sheltering in place but completely cut off from surrounding areas, with some homes reduced down to their foundations by the force of the surge. One of the most dramatic rescue operations happened in Guigang City, about 60 kilometers northeast of Hangzhou. Military rescue teams pulled out more than 10,000 students and teachers who were trapped in a cluster of flooded schools. State television footage showed children in bright orange life vests climbing onto rescue boats, floating away from school. Buildings that looked like they were rising out of a muddy lake. It's a striking image, and a sobering reminder of how fast this flooding overtook entire communities. Reports indicate some of these schools had students and staff trapped for multiple days before rescue teams could reach them safely, relying on food and water drops in the meantime. The human toll isn't the only story here. In Guigang, a local zoo reported that more than 100 animals escaped or went missing when floodwaters damaged their enclosures, including zebras, alpacas, miniature pigs, porcupines, raccoons, and dozens of tropical birds and peacocks. In Hangzhou, snakes reportedly escaped from a nearby breeding farm during the flooding. Some accounts describe venomous species like cobras among them, prompting authorities to stockpile anti-venom and issue public safety guidance on what to do if residents encounter one. Local animal shelter volunteers have also been working to rescue stranded pets. One shelter operator in Binyang County spent days ferrying around 200 cats and dozens of dogs through floodwaters, 2 dogs at a time, while cats climbed to rafters to escape the rising water. There's also a grimmer agricultural dimension to this. Thousands of livestock reportedly drowned when pig farms in the region were submerged, and with carcasses left sitting in floodwater under intense summer heat for more than 48 hours. HARS authorities have warned of a real risk of water contamination and disease spreading in the aftermath. These smaller, stranger details of the disaster, escaped zoo animals, loose snakes, rooftop rescues of pets, contaminated floodwater from drowned livestock, capture just how chaotic and unpredictable the situation became once the water started rising uncontrolled. Amid all of this, misinformation has also become part of the story. Unverified claims circulated on Chinese social media suggesting that additional reservoirs near Guigang had also collapsed or developed serious leaks. Local authorities pushed back, stating those reservoirs were operating normally. A reminder that, in a disaster moving this fast, official information and rumor can spread at nearly the same speed. But Guangxi isn't the only region under strain right now. In central China's Hubei province, a separate weather system brought severe convective storms and at least 2 rare tornadoes earlier this week, with wind speeds in some areas reportedly reaching the equivalent of an EF2 rating. 11 people were killed and more than 275 injured, with reports from some outlets putting the death toll as high as 15 as the picture developed in the hours after the storm. Thousands of houses were damaged, with dozens collapsing outright, and in the hardest-hit districts, winds were reportedly strong enough to hurl trucks and tear roofs off logistics facilities. Chinese state media described the event as characterized by sudden onset and short-duration, high-intensity winds, meaning there was very little warning before the destruction hit. Tornadoes of this kind are genuinely unusual for this part of China, and meteorologists studying the event have linked the atmospheric instability partly to the same broader weather pattern that fed Typhoon Maysak's rainfall further south. And the more-on-the-way part of this story has already arrived. Typhoon Bavi, which we mentioned was approaching earlier in the week, made landfall in the coastal city of Yuhuan in Zhejiang, Nung Province late Saturday night, packing maximum sustained winds of around 144 kilometers per hour. Chinese authorities evacuated more than 1.7 million people ahead of its arrival, issued the country's first red rainstorm alert of the year, and canceled hundreds of flights along with a number of high-speed rail services. Bavi has since weakened to a Sevi, Yondar tropical storm as it pushes inland, and forecasters expect it to curve northeast through Anhui Province before moving out over the Yellow Sea and gradually transitioning into an extratropical system. Even as it weakens, heavy rainfall is still expected through the middle of the week across a wide swath of eastern and northeastern China, with some areas at risk of extremely heavy downpours and continued disruption to shipping and coastal operations. Beyond China's borders, Bavi's outer effects have also been felt. The storm intensified monsoon rains that triggered deadly landslides in the southern Philippines, and its winds injured well over 100 people in Taiwan as it passed just north of the island. This kind of back-to-back storm sequencing is especially dangerous because soil and reservoirs that are already saturated from the first event have far less capacity to absorb additional rainfall, meaning the same volume of rain that caused moderate flooding a week ago could trigger even worse flooding this time around, even in regions that weren't directly hit by Maysak. President Xi Jinping has responded publicly, calling for what state media described as an all-out effort in organizing emergency rescue operations, treating the injured, and resettling displaced residents. He specifically emphasized the need for effective disaster prevention and relief coordination going forward. Language, all that signals just how seriously Beijing is treating the scale of this event. On the financial side, China's National Development and Reform Commission has already allocated tens of millions of yuan from the central budget toward emergency recovery in both Zhejiang and Guangxi, with funds earmarked for repairing damaged roads, water conservancy projects, schools, and hospitals, as authorities try to get daily life back to something resembling normal. On the ground in Guangxi, the recovery effort is enormous. Crews have been deployed to clear mud and debris and disinfect flood-damaged towns throughout Hangzhou to prevent disease outbreaks in standing water. A real risk after major flooding, since stagnant water contaminated with sewage, decaying livestock, and debris can quickly become a breeding ground for waterborne illness. Electricity has reportedly been restored to more than 60,000 homes, and road repair crews are working to reconnect communities that were cut off by Washu, de-out roads and bridges. In villages like Liulan and nearby Gantang, residents have been photographed using excavators to scoop damaged furniture and household belongings out of homes in a single pass, piling ruined possessions along the roadside as convoys of rescue vehicles and lorries pass through police checkpoints. Officials say floodwaters have receded in some of the worst-hit areas, but the situation is far from resolved given the rain that Bavai is still delivering to other parts of the country. There's also a broader climate and infrastructure context worth mentioning here, because it explains why this keeps happening. Researchers studying China's water infrastructure have pointed out that many small and medium-sized reservoirs across the country, not just in Guangxi, are aging and increasingly struggling to withstand the kind of extreme rainfall events that climate change is making more frequent. Some of these reservoirs, Liulan included, were built decades ago under older engineering standards, designed around historical rainfall patterns that no longer reflect current extremes. That's a structural vulnerability that extends well beyond this one storm. China's own national meteorological data shows the country is warming faster than the global average, and government climate assessments have specifically flagged frequent and severe extreme weather as an emerging pattern authorities need to prepare for. Engineers who've looked at the Liulan breach note that even recently upgraded reservoirs can still be pushed past their design limits by a sufficiently extreme storm, and whether that's what happened here is likely to become the subject of a formal investigation. Elsewhere in the region, this same storm system's remnants have contributed to deadly landslides in Bangladesh, where at least 13 Rohingya refugees died in flood-prone camps Pidek and Tasat, prompting authorities there to relocate residents to safer ground. It's a reminder that this isn't an isolated regional event. It's part of a much larger pattern of extreme rainfall affecting large parts of Asia simultaneously, driven by the same weather systems moving across the region. So where does this leave things right now? Floodwaters have receded in parts of Guangxi, but Typhoon Bobby has already brought a second wave of disruption to the eastern coast, with heavy rain still forecast into the middle of this week across several provinces. Search efforts for the 9 people still missing in Guangxi are ongoing. Structural inspections of dams, schools, and public buildings across the region are almost certainly going to intensify, especially given how suddenly the Liulan Reservoir failed. And it wouldn't be surprising if this event prompts a broader national review of reservoir safety standards in the months ahead, particularly for the thousands of aging small and medium-sized dams scattered across rural China. This is a genuinely serious, still developing disaster. Real deaths, real mass evacuations, and real infrastructure failures, now compounded by a second typhoon hitting a country that hadn't finished recovering from the first. I'll continue tracking updates as new numbers and reports come in, especially as Bobby's remnants push further inland and as investigators start digging into exactly why the Liulan Dam gave way. If you want to stay updated as this story develops, subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up. And thank you to everyone supporting the channel. It helps keep this kind of on-the-ground tracking going.